Someone's going to get fired as a direct result of this podcast today.
Paul Green's
MSP Marketing
Podcast.
There's a possibility that someone's going to get fired as a direct result of this podcast today. That's a scary thought, isn't it? I'm talking about technicians. Now, I know, let me give you that caveat. I know that recruiting and retaining technicians is hard work right now. It's going to be something that continues, I think, throughout 2023. But just because it's hard to find, attract and retain talent doesn't mean that we should put up with bad talent. What I mean is technicians who have come in with the wrong attitude, who just don't bring their A game to work. Essentially, they're working against you. You know deep down who these people are. Don't say their name out loud, but if you were to think about someone right now, who's the weakest member of your team? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? If you were to ask the other technicians on your team, just maybe they would have the same name on their lips as well. And in fact, you could kind of test this with some senior members of your tech team, people that you trust not to go and tell anyone else that you've asked that question. If 2 or 3 of you who've worked together for a while all agree that there is someone who is not pulling their weight, and it's because they haven't got the right attitude rather than anything else, then really that person has to go. There are actually a ton of tools available to help you figure out who should stay and who should go. And I've got one here, which is from the excellent book Traction by Gino Wickman. Now, there's a whole series of books in the Traction series. I've talked about them before on the podcast because they are wonderful books for helping you get a grip on the chaos within your MSP and, setting yourself on a growth track for the future. It's a lot of work, but isn't that the case for businesses anyway, that there's always a lot of work to be done? So one of the things, around about the middle of the book Traction, and Traction is the introductory book to the series, it's the one you should start with, that talks about something called the People Analyzer. Now, the People Analyzer allows you to score all of your people against the core values of the business. So what are core values? Well, something that they get you to do earlier in the book is to sit down and think, what are the core values? When we're recruiting people, what are the core values we want to recruit them to? So typically for MSPs, that would be, a deep desire to get the job done. It would be huge levels of customer service. It would be to genuinely care about someone's problem. It's to, it's those kind of things. In fact, the easy way to find your core values for the business is actually to think about your own personal core values. What I tend to find is that the owner or the operator of the business, if they're owning and operating with passion, then they typically have a whole set of core values which become the business's core values. This is what makes each of our businesses so wonderfully different, because they are reflections of us. They are not just, a series of things that we've got out of a book. So if you could write down, and this is something you can reflect on during a long dog walk or over a coffee or a weekend away or something, what are the core values of the business? And you can check in with Traction if you want to do that exercise formally. Then you can put your people, you can kind of draw a grid and you can put your people down the left-hand side, literally list their names down the left-hand side and put the core values for your business across the top. And then you can go through and kind of give them a score against each of these core values. Now, what they recommend in Traction, rather than a number score, they recommend like a plus or a minus score. So for example, if let's imagine one of your core values was takes ownership of problems. You might have a member of your staff called Sally Jones, and you might think, oh, Sally, she's awesome. She always takes ownership of problems. So in where the value and Sally intersect, you put in a plus. And then you've got another member of your team called John Smith, and John Smith does not take ownership of problems whatsoever. So for him, you'd put the minus, because he doesn't do that. But then you've got a third member of your team called George Wilson, and George kind of sometimes takes ownership of problems and sometimes doesn't. So for George, you would put a plus and a minus. And as I say, this is how they score it in the book Traction. You could probably think of an easier way to do it, but you get the principle of what we're trying to do here. Because what you want to be able to do is look at the grid when you finish scoring each of your staff according to each of your core values and ask yourself, Why am I hanging on to John Smith? Because look, he's scored a negative. It's a no in all of these core values. There is no place for someone in your business like that. And this kind of allows you to identify the extreme outliers, because you can see who your very best people are, but you probably know that anyway. You can see who your kind of B team players are, the people that are of average performance, and maybe those are, maybe they can be improved, or maybe you just look at them and think, right, we've got to do some work on them. But it's the C team players, it's the worst ones, the bottom 20% of 20%, those people have got to go. And this formally helps you to identify who those people are. It's worth doing that for all of your team, and don't forget to do yourself in that as well, because I think what happens, especially if you've been an owner for a long time, is we do go through sort of dips, peaks and troughs as business owners. We have times where we're utterly in love with our business and it doesn't matter what the issues and problems are, we can cope with them. And then we have other times where everything is just too much and kind of like our own personal attitude just dips down. Maybe it's just worth, scoring yourself to see how well you do against the core values of the business. I guess another way of asking that is, would you fire yourself?
Paul Green's
MSP Marketing
Podcast.